Okay, and welcome to our February edition of the Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility webinar series. My name is Elliott McFadden. I work for the Minnesota Department of Transportation as the Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility Coordinator, and I'm your host for these series. Today we will be having a discussion about Microtransit, the technology behind making better on-demand services. Just a little background on our webinar series. We started this last fall as programming out of my program at MnDOT, the Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility Program, to increase familiarity with different mobility technologies and services across the state. And it's a platform as a knowledge share. So it's an opportunity for us to share the experiences and lessons learned of other systems around the state and around the country with you. We are scheduling these on a monthly basis, so future webinars will occur on the second Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. Our next webinar will actually be in April. We'll be skipping March because of the Minnesota Transportation Conference will be during our normal time, but we will be returning in April. We don't have our subject finalized for that yet, but look in your email box in the next coming weeks. We will announce the next topic. If you have anybody in your office who might be interested in joining in on these webinars, you can email to me, elliott.mcfadden@state.mn.us. That's Elliott with 2 L's and 2 T's. And I'll be happy to add them in on the invite list. If you got an invite today, you should be getting invites in the future. Also, if you missed any of our previous webinars, so we talked about GTFS, mobility as a service, and mobility hubs. We have those recorded on the MnDOT transit page. You'll see a button on there for webinars, and you can see all of those previous webinars there. As I said, we will not have a webinar in March because of the Minnesota Transportation Conference that will be happening there. I encourage folks to check that out if you haven't yet. That's a great opportunity to continue knowledge share and building more information about our industry. Did want to let people know that I will be presenting along with Microtransit on the subject of mobility as a service on Thursday, March 11th at 10 a.m. at the conference. So if you are attending, I hope you will come and sit in virtually on our session. Also wanted to let you know we have some more resources coming your way. So we just had completed for MnDOT a report by the Musicant group who did a pilot program with the city and with MnDOT on mobility hubs, which you heard a little bit about in our last webinar. They have come up with a toolkit. So best practices if you're thinking about doing mobility hubs. So if you're an invitee on this this webinar today, look in your inbox in the next day or so. We'll be sending out that toolkit so you've got more resources as well. And with that, we will jump in to our first speaker. So let me go ahead and turn off my presentation. Matt Fyten is with Southwest Transit. They have been doing a lot of interesting work in microtransit and have asked him to share with us a little bit of background and where they're heading with their Southwest Prime microtransit service. So with that, Matt, take it away.
All right, thank you, Elliott. Appreciate you having us. Let me pull up my presentation here.
We can see it.
All right, great. So yeah, again, thanks, Elliott, for inviting me. I'm happy to chat about Southwest Prime anytime I get the chance. It's always good to talk with other kind of transit industry folk, and especially local here in Minnesota as well. So I look forward to the conversation, and hopefully I'll provide some good information here. So I'm here to talk about our Southwest Prime service, which is our microtransit service, but I first want to give just kind of a quick overview of Southwest Transit for those of you who may not know us as well. We are the public transit provider for the southwestern suburbs of Minneapolis, primarily the cities of Eden Prairie, Chaska, Chanhassen are our 3 core member cities, as well as we do provide service actually with the Prime service to the communities of Carver and Victoria, which sit further west in our service area. We are a public transit provider governed by a commission. We have 6 individuals appointed from our member cities, and we do have 1 rider representative that sits on our commission as well. We are a suburban transit provider, also known as an opt-out provider. That opt-out term coming from legislation in 1983 that allowed suburbs to essentially opt out of the regional transit system, or technically Metro Transit at the time, because those suburban communities felt that they weren't receiving the level of service that they deserved based on the amount of funds they were putting in via property tax. That funding structure has now changed to MVEST, but still, we believe is still quite relevant in terms of ensuring our communities have the levels of service that are required. Southwest Transit was formed in 1986 under the opt-out legislation by our 3 communities, Eden Prairie, Chaska, and Chanhassen. I'll say, everything is with context. Pre-COVID, we did operate about 160 daily express trips with 75 buses, with express services being really our bread and butter services that account for about 90% of our ridership. With those rides going primarily to downtown Minneapolis and the University of Minnesota. We do have a park and ride based system primarily along the 212 corridor in our service area. We've been recognized nationally as a leader in innovation, technology, transit-oriented development. I'm obviously here to talk about one big piece of that innovation is our microtransit service, Southwest Prime. We have been the provider of choice in our service area for many special events. The state fair being the biggest. We'll see if we'll be doing that this year. We're hopeful, but if we have to wait till next year to do that, that's okay too. Our agency has over $60 million in assets, most of that tied up in vehicles and our park and ride facilities. And then we generally, pre-COVID, would provide around 1.2 million rides per year, with Southwest Prime accounting for about 10% of those trips, so about 120,000 or so. I will just say during COVID, our ridership has been significantly impacted. We do have more of a choice rider market with our express services to downtown Minneapolis. They're about 90% down still, but our Southwest Prime service has seen a steady increase in ridership. Initially, it was down, I want to say about 70%, and we've clawed our way back to about 50% of pre-COVID levels. So Prime is actually the most productive service that we currently have. So what is Southwest Prime? We started operating Southwest Prime in 2015. We believe we were, if not the first transit agency in the nation to start operating a service like this, we were certainly one of the first, certainly the first in Minnesota to start providing the service in 2015. It is essentially a newer, more technologically driven form of dollar ride service. Really modeled after your TNCs, the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, of providing on-demand rides with dynamically scheduled vehicles that can be that are really operating in real time in terms of both reservations, routing, batching of rides, and so forth. Our service, we chose to really go about doing on-demand only, no advanced scheduling. Some of that came about because when we first introduced the service, even though our technology provider, which was called RideCell, was a company we were working with, they had the capability to do both scheduled rides and on-demand rides, but we found they didn't really work that well together when we first launched. The scheduled rides were, on-demand rides were bumping scheduled rides to the point they weren't even coming close to meeting their schedule. So we said, you know what? Let's just go on demand, and it actually ended up being kind of a happy accident in a way, because our productivity increased dramatically, and we found that most riders preferred the on-demand setup over scheduling, and it certainly helps with efficiency by not having standing orders. It is a curb-to-curb service, similar to your standard demand response and dollar ride services. We do not provide ADA service, though the service is accessible. Like all transit service, through the application, you can note that you have a mobility device that you need to use, and we will ensure that a mobility-equipped vehicle is dispatched to that particular rider, but it is not an ADA service like a Metro Mobility. Again, we serve Eden Prairie, Chanhassen, and Chaska, Victoria, and Carver. It's about an 80 square mile service area, which is a rather large service area for microtransit. I know when I look at case studies around the country, microtransit service areas usually are fairly limited in scope, really more of a pilot project. And we just decided to go ahead and make it our entire service area, which actually ended up, I think, being a key factor to its success. We have switched software providers. Spare Labs is who we use as our software vendor to book routes and rides. And I'm not usually one to promote too many vendors, but they truly are, I believe, probably the best in the industry right now when it comes to microtransit. I've worked with, but certainly had many discussions with the software vendors throughout the years that we've been operating. And I do believe Spare is above the rest at this moment. Our current fares are $4 a ride for general public. We do have a transit assistance program here in the Metro. If you meet certain qualifications in terms of income levels primarily, you can qualify for a transit assistance program, which provides you $2 rides. We have senior days on the service, which are also $2, which just Mondays. If you are above the age of 65, you can ride the service for $2 a trip. We have implemented our grocery getter service, which is really taking a look at our service levels and saying, where do we not see the demand is high? And it's really from that 9 to noon hour on weekdays. So we said, well, during the pandemic here, we want to make sure people have access to essential services. And so we said, well, let's start just by opening up, by providing discounted rides to select areas, in this case, the grocery stores in our service area, between that 9 to noon hour on weekdays. And that's something that we can pretty easily set up with the Spare software. And you can also call in like you would a standard dollar ride service and book your ride that way. So that is still an option on the Southwest Prime service. That you can call in, and a reservationist essentially inputs the ride into the software, just like the rider would on the phone application. And then we do have a non-emergency medical service, which is we call Southwest Prime MD. This is kind of our foray into looking at scheduled rides and how we can implement them into our service. That is $5 a trip to various medical centers, both in and around our service area. You can schedule that ride up to 14 days in advance to get to the service or to get to your appointment. And then since nobody knows how long you're going to be at a doctor's appointment, you can, when you're done with your appointment, you'll just book a regular Prime ride like you would on the way back for an on-demand service. So I'll go into just quickly here. Why did we go with Southwest Prime? It really kind of, it somewhat organically came about because we found that, we're in a suburban land use area where it's difficult to service people on a fixed route local service, especially as you move further west in our service area. So our service area in Eden Prairie is kind of your more third ring suburb, dense, 70,000 population, more of a dense suburb. And as you move west all the way up to Carver, you're becoming ex-urban to essentially rural in some areas. So effectively servicing that type of service area with fixed route circulators, which we had tried everything under the sun, and it just wasn't working. We would have everything we'd launch, we get a few rides, and in order to provide the level of service to get enough ridership we'd be looking for, first of all, we never get to the ridership, and we'd have subsidies per passenger over $100 per passenger, and it just wasn't sustainable. So we essentially scrapped all of our local service, actually well ahead of even starting Southwest Prime. But we were always looking for something that would fit the bill. And when the software solutions came out to allow for microtransit services, we thought, this probably makes the most sense for our service area. And indeed it has. Pre-pandemic, we were up over 400 rides a day on Southwest Prime. And with some of the lowest subsidy for passengers in, I think, the entire state, our subsidy per passenger on Prime is around $9 or so, which is almost half as less as the next highest subsidy or most efficient subsidy. See if I covered everything here. We do have a tech-savvy service area population somewhat, so we find that about 65% of the Prime rides are booked over our phone application, and about 35% over the phone. And then also we did have our commission. We did have the political will to implement this service. It somewhat sold itself in terms of the efficiencies that we were able to bring and demonstrate in selling the service, but we do have a commission that is bought into innovation and seeing where we can demonstrate new services in the transit area and realm, and it was not a very hard sell for our commission, in that we were also able to reallocate some of our existing funds that we were using for these local circulators and saying, you know what, we can provide a better service in a cheaper way. The fleet for Southwest Prime, it's kind of a hodgepodge at this point in time. We have 23 vehicles in the fleet. We started with 5. At its peak, we were operating 17 vehicles in revenue service. Obviously, it grew rapidly from, I'd say, 2015 to 2018, and we were forced to find really any different types of vehicles we could find. So these are just 2 examples. We have kind of your more standard cutaway or small van vehicle, all the way down to Chevy Equinox that we're using at times, just a standard SUV to provide the services. I did mention just a quick, this is how the application looks in terms of booking a ride. It's pretty simple. Just say where to, you input your information. You can either do this over the phone by saying, just telling them where you need to get to, or you can use the app. Generally, you can book the ride within 20 seconds. Rides are confirmed automatically via text message. You can track the vehicle location live on the phone applications, and then notifications are sent to the passengers that are using the phone application upon the vehicle arrival, saying that the vehicle is there. There's a piece I want to cover there, but I think it's coming up. This kind of shows what our dispatchers see. This is kind of what they see, a live time real-time dashboard of the service. So our dispatchers can look and say, okay, looking at this, we've got our vehicles out. The green are live and have passengers on them. The gray vehicles are paused or on break. And then the yellow would indicate there might be some sort of technology issue that needs to be addressed in terms of connectivity as well. This just gives further detail. You can click on any particular vehicle. It will give you the entire real-time itinerary of that vehicle so that our dispatchers can have better manage understanding where vehicles are at, how long they're going to be utilized for, and that helps for planning breaks. And we can also move trips to different vehicles if needed, but that really doesn't occur as much as it used to under the old software. I'll just touch on some performance numbers here. This was, again, pre-pandemic, 2019. So remember, an 80 square mile service area, our average ride time was a little over 9 minutes. Our average wait time was a little under 20 minutes. We generally would shoot for average wait times under a half hour, but really we try to keep it under 20 minutes, which we were able to do. Again, we were averaging close to 400 rides a day, with the average trip distance being about 5 miles per trip. Our passengers per in-service hour, we shoot for above, well, really 3 is our goal, but if you're going above 2, that's still considered pretty efficient, and we're ultimately okay with that. Again, I said peak buses used actually was up to 17 before the pandemic, $8 subsidy per passenger. I mentioned the rider booking method there. And then our customer reviews, you can review the service at the end of each trip, and like you would on an Uber or Lyft, and we get about 4.8 out of 5 in terms of the customer satisfaction on the service. So we're very pleased with that. Then I got a few minutes here, just share a quick our lessons learned so far through 5 years of operating this type of service, now almost 6. I cannot stress enough how important the algorithm is on these softwares. When you're looking at these types of services, there is going to be a very different set of rules that a software is going to want to follow when you're looking at providing service from both urban to suburban to even rural areas. A lot of these vendors will say that their algorithm is going to cover everything for you. I'm here to tell you that that's just not true. Our first software vendor was built for essentially downtown San Francisco and to be a Uber and Lyft competitor. And those decision makings that they put into their algorithm really didn't make a whole lot of sense, we found, in our particular suburban and exurban environment. And so that was the driving force behind why we switched providers. And with Spare Labs, we have a provider that has really a dynamic algorithm that can tailor the algorithm to a given service area, and it'll change the decision making that the software is making to better fit your service area. I mentioned service area. We believe it's a good idea not to be too restrictive. I don't think you should be nervous to go big with a service area. You're ultimately going to increase the amount of potential demand on the service and really realize whatever your potential demand is. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to provide the rides unless people are booking them. So it's not like having a larger service area is going to be necessarily more expensive to operate. Operating on demand and scheduled rides, it can potentially be problematic, but again, with our new software, we're finding that the technology is starting to catch up on that front where people can start being a little more creative in the types of on-demand versus scheduled services they provide. I will just say on an administration front, generally the administration costs the overhead is much less than your traditional dial-a-ride service. We had, I think it was up to 5, 6, 7 reservationists back in the old days of dial-a-ride service in our service area. And now we are able to do it with one person taking those reservations, also dispatching the service. So one person is essentially able to do everything on this type of service. Which you can imagine there's some significant cost savings there. You may have some increased negative customer service interactions. That's just kind of the nature of some demand response service. You tend to have potentially more problem riders than you would on, say, our fixed route services. And there may be some more dedicated staff time to dealing with some of the administration that comes with dealing with negative, disruptive riders. We do mention fraud protections. You can pay for our service over the spare application that is branded Southwest Prime. But we did have a case where we had individuals using multiple stolen credit cards to help pay for rides, and just making sure that you got proper setup to make sure that you're not on the hook for those instances of fraud. We have found that our rider demographics are similar to your traditional standard dial-a-ride services in terms of our ridership tends to be more lower income, more senior populations, more of your kind of traditional transit dependent populations. But we do also find a fair amount of people that are using it for their daily commutes as well. A little bit less during the pandemic, obviously, but we have found that people are using the service still for that reason. And then also don't let first mile, last mile. This may not be as applicable to rural systems. But in urban systems, a lot of people like to look at microtransit as a first mile, last mile solution. When we found it's really more of a point-to-point solution on a demand response basis. I want to say last I looked, I think it was 18% of our service was first mile, last mile, and that certainly has diminished during the pandemic. I did mention that microtransit, we believe, is really the public transit form of Uber and Lyft. I like to say, it's no different than why dial-a-ride came along to make an affordable version of taxis. We see microtransit really doing the same thing, only replacing your Ubers and Lyfts, taxis with your Ubers and Lyfts. And then finally, just be willing to take risks. The great thing about these types of softwares is that they are so dynamic and can change on the fly so quickly. And a lot of it is back-end stuff that the customers won't be impacted by drastically. So don't be afraid to take risks, do trial and error. There's the technology companies out there are evolving and do have the customer service folks that can help you work through those things so you're not doing it alone. And make changes on the fly. That's something we embrace here at Southwest Transit. I kind of view the Prime system as an ongoing pilot that just continues to evolve. And that's because we're willing to take risks and make changes on the fly. And then finally, I'll just touch on what's next. We're looking at electric vehicles for the services, potentially looking at Tesla on the service, and we'll see what other vehicles come online here. But our goal is to eventually electrify the fleet. We'll look at autonomous demonstrations. We believe that will play a role long-term, expanding our service area to suburb-to-suburb services, and then, like I talked about, taking those scheduled rides and on-demand rides and making those more dynamic moving forward. I got through that with hopefully not taking up too much time. So I appreciate everyone listening.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That was great. It looks like we've got folks that are taking advantage of the chat box to ask questions, and we even have people answering questions in the chat box. So if you do have questions that are coming up, go ahead and put them in there. If you don't get an answer from somebody else in the chat box, we will make sure to ask our presenters at the end of the Q&A period your questions. Before I introduce our next presenter, I did want to let folks know, I did not mention this in the introduction, Karen Winger from Gwinnett County Transit, who was to be our third presenter, had an emergency come up with work this week and was not able to join us today. She has indicated that she's happy to come back, and it sounds like by seeing the number of attendees today and the questions that this is a popular topic. So perhaps we'll have another microtransit session in the coming months, and can have Karen come and join us that day. So our next speaker is Matthew Brown. He's from Baldwin County in Alabama and works with the BRATS transit system. And he's going to tell us a little bit about how they have been looking at microtransit as they're serving a very diverse area with a lot of rural populations. So Matthew, if you want to go ahead and pull your presentation up, and we will get started with you.
All right, thank you, Elliott. Thank you for the opportunity to present here today. We're excited. I'm Director of Transportation with BRATS Transportation. I'll kind of, in this presentation, give you a little bit of background about our existing service and where it's evolved with time. All right, so a quick introduction to myself. I usually title myself as BRATS Driver 656. First thing I did when I came on board here at BRATS was get my CDL so I could experience what the drivers were experiencing in the field. And I don't drive very often, but every other month or so, I'll get out there for a half day and drive one of the vehicles, experience what these drivers are experiencing and how our system is working out in the field. My background is in law and engineering. I'm relatively new to the transit field, but public transit has impacted my life since I was almost born. My father drove for public transit in Des Moines, Iowa. Grew up in the state of Iowa and used to go up to the Lake Bemidji area in northern Minnesota every year for fishing. Some of the fondest memories from my childhood. So I love the state and area up there. But have used public transit in Chicago, Pensacola, Florida, Washington, D.C., of course, now in Baldwin County, and then around the world, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and India to a great extent. I lived there for a short period of time. And what I found about public transit in all of these regions is that you can experience the local community maybe better than any other way in a really quick fashion by riding public transit. You get to meet the locals, spend time with the locals. In India specifically, I made many friendships just by sitting down to someone I had never met before on a bus or a train in India, and that resulted in getting invited over to their homes for dinner. And it was just a great way to develop relationships and meet your neighbor. For lack of a better word. So a little bit of background about BRATS. Baldwin County is our service area. We're one of the 2 coastal counties in South Alabama. This text here is kind of small, but it was founded in 1985. We have about 33 drivers. Some of those are part-time. Most of them are full-time. We have about 40 cutaway buses. All of them are ADA accessible. We're 100% demand response. I know microtransit's kind of like a buzzword in this decade and kind of in the latter end of the prior decade. But the concept of microtransit has existed for a long time in dial-a-ride services. And essentially microtransit, there's a lot of different definitions out there, but it's a flexible form of transit, not just fixed routes, but usually something that's a little bit more dynamic. And so we've operated that from 1985, an exclusively demand response service. But obviously things have changed, technology has changed, and that's something we wanted to respond to. The majority of our passengers are individuals with mobility challenges, and many of those are ADA passengers, but the majority would be folks with age-related mobility challenges. Certainly we have lots of just regular folks who don't have transportation using us, but we wanted to get to the point where we were broadening the tent and expanding our service to something that was the average citizens would want to use because of its convenience and usability. So our service area is about 1,500 square miles. We're the largest county in Alabama, and that presents many of its own challenges. Parts of the county, you'll see we're the fastest growing county in Alabama, and we have about 7 million visitors a year at the beach. Thankfully, we have a very forward-thinking local government, which has played a big role in us moving forward. We have 9 different incorporated municipalities in the county. Some of them are larger, and I know this is still small compared to many urban areas, but We have what we call our Eastern Shore, which is actually it's the Eastern Shore of Mobile Bay, so the western side of the county. We have a pretty dense urban area there with a small MPO. And then in the southern part of the county, we have larger municipalities or cities. And so those are kind of some of the dynamics that we work in as we serve this entire area, including within the cities and the unincorporated area. So like I said, we were founded in 1985, initially as a dial ride service. And I call this BRATS 1.0 because we provided, and the folks who worked in the service then provided a great service to the community. So there's no disparaging at all what has been done in the past. They provided great work and really impacted the community. And at this time, Elliott, I wanted to show that video. We might not show the full 3 minutes, but it really sets the groundwork for what BRATS is and what we do here in Baldwin County.
Yeah, we were having a little issue with the video sharing earlier, so we're going to switch. I'm going to present this next screen, and then we will come back to Matthew. So, okay.
It doesn't look like the sound's coming through anymore, Elliott.
Okay, let me try that again.
There came a point in my life where I had to decide, am I going to live at home and live in a rocking chair, or am I going to plug myself back into life and participate in life and not let life pass me by? And when I made that decision, I began to look at all the factors that are involved in that and all the things that I needed to do in my own life to make those things happen. And one of the main issues was transportation. And having the ability to get around in my own environment became central to my success. And I would say that was probably one of the most important factors that contributed to my success.
Not very many people can sit here and say that they enjoy going to work every day and doing what they do. But I honestly do. We meet so many different people. I have cried with people on this bus. I have laughed with umpteen passengers on the bus. I prayed with some. I feel blessed with this job because not only I'm hoping that I'm blessing them, but I know I'm being blessed by them. In what I do, and I see the difference that it makes in our community. I hear some of my passengers say all the time, look, without y'all, I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do everything that you and I might take for granted.
My name is Katie Evans. I ride the bus to work Monday through Friday every week for about 10 years now. I started riding the bus because I started having horrible panic attacks when I drove, and they got worse and worse. And the bus enabled me to be able to get to work every day safely without me freaking out. It's easy and convenient to call and schedule a ride. Just call a day or so in advance, and they'll get you put on the schedule. Riding the bus has helped me keep my independence and not rely on others to get me to and from work.
Hey there, Elliott. We can probably go ahead and transition back to the webinar now for taking time. Go ahead and reshare my screen. All right, so I want to kind of talk a little bit about the philosophy that led us to the transition. And so we're going to talk about the deeper questions of transit here. And we kind of started asking ourselves, why does my transit organization exist? And there are three responses. Hopefully all these aren't, or some of these aren't our default responses, but some might say, well, we're just a perpetually existing government agency. Hopefully that's not our perspective, but I think sometimes it can be easy to fall in that rut almost subliminally, even if it's not our verbal response. Another common response, and I would say probably the most common response in terms of the way we deliver service, is we would say to provide transportation for those who have no other option. And certainly we want to make sure we're there as that net for folks who do not have that other option. But then there's number three, to provide a desirable transportation option in your community. And we kind of said, we want to make sure we exist for number three. Certainly, we want to accomplish number two, but that we're existing with the goal of number three in mind. So we asked ourselves, do we still have a service that people want to use? As cultural expectations change, we realize so must our service. So we stopped and said, just looking at some of the literature out there that in the past has kind of set the context for service delivery. This TCRP report 161 deals with rural transit forecasting, and I'm going to go through this really quickly. So, but you notice it for projecting future trips in rural transit. They give this formula here. They say that demand trips per year is equal to 2.2 times population, age 60 plus, 5.21 times individuals with disabilities, ages 18 to 64, and then 1.52 times residents with no vehicle. Now, what's interesting about this formula, it only focuses on individuals who have no other option. And what we essentially concluded is if your service model begins to focus on folks who have no other option, you can easily fall into this rut of becoming a monopoly and not responding to the needs of your community and providing a service that, even if they're using it because they need it, they're also using it because it's a desirable service and a convenient service for them to use. Now, we realize there are limitations with our ability to move buses around quickly and everything like that, but our goal is, can we get our service to be something that's more user-friendly, whether or not an individual actually needs our trip? So BRATS 1.0, the old way that we operated the system, the first question that someone had to ask is, can BRATS take me there? And it wasn't easy to determine that with certainty. So they would pull open our scheduling booklet. It was a 45-page booklet. Almost every page had a table like this. And even our drivers found the book very confusing. I found the book very, very confusing. It just, over time, it just built out page by page by page over the years with lots of information. It was very difficult to understand for the public. So then they would call in, they'd talk to a dispatcher. That dispatcher would look on a computer to see if a trip was available. All this had to be done 24 hours before the trip was going to take place. So then that you come to the day when the trip actually takes place, the person has been given a 30-minute window that the vehicle is going to show up the day prior when the trip's booked. So now they're out there waiting for the vehicle to show up. They're looking at their watch. The vehicle hasn't arrived yet. They always anchor to the beginning of the window, and they wonder why the vehicle's not there. Down here, it gets hot. I know in Minnesota, you can have the opposite problem with it being too cold and folks just waiting, wondering where their vehicle is. So then they call us back, and then we had to call the driver or radio the driver and find out what was going on. And sooner or later, that vehicle would arrive at the person's home. There would be a cash transaction. It had to be the exact amount. They would board the bus, go to their destination, and repeat the whole process over again to return home. We found that a large number of the calls our dispatcher was taking were actually calls with folks wondering where their bus was. And it was a pretty lengthy process that then had to take place to reach out to the driver to verify that. So our goal was to find a solution that could solve a lot of those problems in kind of one sweep. So as we look at the expectations for 2020, and certainly this is carrying forward, people are looking for on-demand services. So more and more, they're not interested in walking to a bus stop. More and more, they're not interested in having some type of cumbersome booking process. They want to be able to call, book a trip, have it show up with as much flexibility as possible. And just the private sector is training people to have these expectations with the services that are now being offered in the private sector. On the transportation side, of course, we're all familiar with Uber and Lyft. There's this third provider called Via. When I came on board here at BRATS, one of the first things I did was reach out to all three of these companies, not so much to team up with them as much as to just understand their service model and whether or not there was anything that could be utilized from their service model in our transit system. It turns out Via kind of specializes in sharing rides instead of dedicated rides. And of course, all the companies now were providing some type of shared ride before the COVID hit. But Via and Uber both were very friendly and had great conversations with both. And Via said, hey, listen, we'd love to team up with you on this IMI grant. So that brings us to BRATS 2.0. We were awarded a grant, Integrated Mobility Innovation Grant through FTA. We really appreciate FTA giving us the opportunity. I think we were one of 104 applicants or so. And I think there were somewhere between 12 and 20 selected for some of the funding. So under this grant, Via is providing us a software as a service. So we're using our drivers, our vehicles, our admin team with their software essentially operating our system. So this has required a new philosophy on our part. And it has, I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's been a bed of roses. It has been a difficult process. There have been a lot of hurdles. One thing that we did is we didn't just test this with a small segment of our service. We transitioned our entire service over to Via as part of this program. And when you transition the entire thing over, it's like a sink or swim. You're almost burning the ships at that point. And so you have to adjust quickly and make changes quickly. And we found that out right away. We launched it on September 14th. We got hit by Hurricane Sally. The next day, the county shut down for that. And so it created a chaotic launch. But one thing we've learned is that we had to prioritize action over planning. Now, this doesn't mean we dispense with planning by any stretch of the imagination, but kind of old school planning, as we like to think about it, is plan, and then act. And the problem with this thing, things are changing so fast now. Technology is changing so fast that if you spend more than 6 months to 12 months planning, your plan's already out of date. So kind of the new school planning is this integrated approach where we're planning and acting at the same time. And this has required a really kind of integrated process with our software developer or Via providing this. But as we launched, our focus was, we really had two objectives: serve existing passengers. We have lots of dialysis patients that we serve, lots of members of the community who really depend on us. So we wanted to make sure in the transition, we continued to serve their needs and then expand to new passengers. We think that there's a possible passenger group that we could tap into with parents who want to get transportation to their kids. Suddenly they can't make it to pick up their child from ball practice or something after school, that they could utilize this service with our background check drivers, video cameras on our buses and everything to feel like they have another safe transportation opportunity. So the initial concept, we had 4 primary zones kind of centered on our urban areas. And then we had this vast expanse of rural area that we were going to treat the rural area as these outer zones and call these urban areas our primary zones. We still generally follow this concept, but it's tweaked a little bit over time. Essentially, you can get a trip under this new service from any part of the county to any other part of the county with a couple minor exceptions. But it's going to require more advanced booking time if it's one of the longer distance trips. So formally, this is kind of the material that we've distributed with the launch. This is the portal that we use with Via. This is what's called the ride plan. As trips get booked, passengers can book them on demand, or they can pre-schedule those rides. As they get accepted into the system, they get placed on a driver's schedule, which can be adjusted as new trips come in as necessary. There are other tools within the portal, common pretty much across software providers, but live view things that allow us to see where the different vehicles are and their schedule. And then, of course, there's an app on the Apple Store and the Android store, the Google store, called BRATS On Demand, and that's how we launch our service. So I'm going to show a quick video to show it in live action. My daughter cracked her collarbone a couple months ago, and so I decided to go to the doctor's the next day on BRATS. And so this is that experience in recorded video here. There's no audio, so you'll just watch the video unfold. Someone opens the app. If you've used Uber before, it's a very similar feel to that. You can change your number of passengers, type in your location. From there, you can book your trip. In this case, I've already added a credit card to my account, so it's taking that information and using that for the trip. It searches for an available ride. In this case, you can see I'm booking it at 10 p.m. Our service only goes through around 6:30, so it says we can't find a ride, but I can click the schedule button in the bottom right there, and that gives me an opportunity to look at to select a future day and a future time. Now, since this is a doctor's appointment, I select arrive by instead of depart at. This is something if someone needs to get to work or they need to get to school by a certain time or a medical appointment, they would just select that depart out at time. Then it looks for a ride on that future day and checks to see if it's available. It offers it to me. It's a shorter trip, so it's $2 each way. And I go ahead and click book this ride. Now, under normal circumstances, okay, it gives me an opportunity to book a return. I think I was gonna book the return on demand, so I skipped the pre-scheduled return, and then it takes you to your next rides page, and you can see all your future rides right there. So that's kind of the basic overview of how the booking process works in this app. Then the next step from there is the day of, and again, very similar to Uber. And I'm sorry, there's some volume that might be coming from my speakers here. But you can see the van approaching. They also get text message notifications for a pre-scheduled ride. They'll get one the night before reminding them and giving them that opportunity to cancel. And the day of, they'll also get notifications when the vehicle is on the way. So this is the leap that we've taken. I appreciate some of the comments made by Matt, the prior presenter. One of our biggest struggles is because of the expanse of our rural area. Essentially, we are one large zone, service zone here, but then we have these smaller zones inside the service zones that help. We have 4 different locations that vehicles dispatch out of. So we have the 4 different zones inside the larger zone that kind of help dictate where vehicles need to return to and things of that nature. But it has been a real challenge to get the algorithm to make proper judgment calls on some very expensive trips to some of the rural points of the county, where we would maybe prefer that the software negotiate that trip a little bit more with the passenger, saying, hey, listen, instead of picking you up at this time, we can pick you up 30 minutes later, and that would allow them to use a vehicle that's already 15 minutes away instead of trying to pull a vehicle from the north side of the county that happens to be free right now, but it's going to have to drive 45 minutes just to get to this pickup location. So those are some of the struggles that we've had with the service. Another struggle that we've had is payment method. We've gone completely cashless. If someone wants to use cash or they don't have a credit card, first of all, we really have gone through a huge education process to help passengers know how to use prepaid cards and other options, so that way they can actually have a card on their account, but they can also send in a check or money order and go ahead and get ride credits placed on their account that will get charged down as they book a ride. That's been one of the learning curves that we've dealt with as well, just helping passengers understand what their options are if they don't happen to have a credit card or debit card already in place. So that's a very quick overview of our service. It's been an exciting process. Via claims, I don't know if this is true or not. I have no reason to doubt it, that we're the first fully on-demand rural public transit service on a scale like this in the world. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but I guess it sounds cool, so we'll go with it. But that's all I have in my direct presentation, so we'll go to questions and feedback from there.
Yeah, we'll accept whatever superlatives you guys want to use for your projects. They both sound great. I really appreciate that. I think these were really valuable presentations, and appreciate it. We do have some questions. So a few of these got answered, but a few I think it'd be good to kind of still throw out there. This is a question that comes up a lot with demand response services, especially in rural areas. So questions about staffing. Are you having any problems finding drivers? Are they employees or independent contractors? Do they work a preset schedule or work when they want to? And how do you ensure the supply meets the demand for trips? So that's a lot to unpack, but it's sort of how do you set up your drivers, and how do you manage that with finding drivers and making sure you're meeting demand? So whoever wants to take that first.
Yeah, I can start. I'm probably a little bit different circumstance in terms of, like I said, our service area being more, certainly a different use case than a rural service area. So we use our existing driver providers. So we contract out our drivers for all of our services with First Transit. So we essentially operate the prime service just like we do our fixed route services in terms of ensuring First Transit provides us with the drivers that are required for the service. And they've really, they've done a great job for us in ensuring that we have a steady flow of new drivers to operate the service. But then again, we're also pulling from the Twin Cities metro area. So we have a large pool of people to pull drivers from that are looking for work. I can see that being, excuse me, certainly a tougher issue in rural areas. So maybe I'm not providing that great of a answer on that front, but we're somewhat fortunate in that regard in our use case.
So down here, we don't have a huge issue with recruiting drivers. They are county employees, so from the full-time side, usually we have folks who want to become full-time county employees because of the benefits. When I started 2 years ago, I think we had about 30 full-time drivers and 1 or 2 part-time drivers, and now we're much more at like a 12 part-time drivers with 20 full-time drivers, something in that ballpark. And it's harder to recruit the part-time drivers, but it's financially more beneficial to us as an agency, and some of more flexibility in terms of scheduling. We have what's called a rotating schedule. So drivers in their area, they rotate between a schedule, and then we have 3 terms throughout the year: a spring term, a summer term, and a fall term. That gets set, and then they rotate every 2 pay periods in that. So everybody's getting a good variety, and the part-timers are getting different schedules. And then we have some kind of, if we have enough drivers in the area who are on board, we have some that rotate on a 4-10 basis, and then they're covered by a part-timer on that off day. So we have a part-timers working Monday, Friday. So a lot of different flexibility there. We found the more flexible we can be, while still meeting our demands. We look at what our demand is during the day, and making sure we have the majority of our vehicles available during that time. That helps us with our recruitment.
Great, thank you. Next question has to do with, I guess, any issues that you might have with pushback from private sector. How does this not compete with private sector? So do you have any issues with either Uber, Lyft, or taxi services, or other kind of private sector providers who feel like, this isn't fair competition?
We have had over the years now a few conversations with Uber and Lyft, and it's actually been more complimentary in terms of them viewing us as a complement to their service. I don't think they view us as, quote unquote, stealing their rides. There really is kind of, we are, and at least in our service area, there's not that much Uber and Lyft supply, especially as you get further into the ex-urban areas of our service area. In fact, I think some of them, Uber and Lyft, don't even provide out that far. But even in Eden Prairie and those areas, there just isn't the supply to meet really the demand of our prime riders. And then also, when you look at average trip costs on Uber in our service area, it's over $10 a trip, really, if you're going anywhere in our service area, point to point. And as you do longer trips, it's even more. So that's really just not an affordable ride for the majority of Southwest Prime riders. So we view it as we still are providing a public service that's needed to fill that gap for an affordable transportation option in our service area. And Uber and Lyft are, like I said, it's been overwhelmingly positive reaction towards our service.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. It's very similar. We don't really have a good Uber or Lyft supply in our area. One thing I would say, in some sense, we've always competed with those services, and more so taxi services, prior to us launching the technology side of our service. And, you know, federal regulations don't prohibit us from competing with those agencies. They just prohibit us from competing with charter agencies. And so our goal isn't to compete by any means with the private sector, but in some ways, we are not going to be a viable service to anybody if we don't keep up with what cultural expectations are for transportation and technology.
We are coming up on time, but I'm going to grab one more question for you. And there was a question about funding of vehicles. Was there any sort of special funding that you were doing for that, or is that your normal vehicle procurement process?
In our instance, our funding, especially as the service was growing rapidly, we were fortunate enough to have some capital reserves that we were able to tap for the vehicles. And, you know, with the one thing that's nice with the Microtransit software is you don't necessarily have to go buy a fully equipped Lyft vehicle that costs over $100,000. You know, we were able to get vans, you know, anywhere from 35 to 50,000. So not as much of a capital outlay on those vehicles. So otherwise, it's just part of our regular replacement schedule. In the Twin Cities, we have the Metropolitan Council that we work all of our vehicle replacements with, and those vehicles, once we acquire them, get on that replacement schedule.
Very similar process with BRATS. All of our vehicles, we're using vehicles funded by our normal formula funds, all at 80-20 match. So we just go through a normal replacement cycle.
Great. Well, as you can see from the chat box, there was a lot of conversation going on, a lot of appreciation for these presentations. This is very relevant as we're looking, especially in greater Minnesota with so many of our systems. As Matthew said, we're doing microtransit before microtransit was cool. And as we're looking at trying to implement new technologies and improve the services, this has given us a lot to think about. And we really appreciate both of you taking time to be with us today. For any folks who missed part or all of this, we are recording, and in a few days we will put this as well as the slides up on the transit page for the MnDOT public website, and you will be getting, if you got an invitation for this, you will be getting an email when that posts. Otherwise, as I said, keep an eye out for the toolkit on mobility hubs and for our announcement of our April webinar in the coming weeks. And Matthew and Matt, our dueling Matthews today, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you. My pleasure.